Hi, I'm Ryan, a woodworker growing a small business working out of my single-car garage. It seems like everyone has made a cutting board video. Despite that, I thought I'd share my take on this. Cutting boards are a rite of passage for many woodworkers. They teach foundational skills in layout, panel glue-ups, and finishing. You can make cutting boards with very basic tools, or you can make crazy engrain boards in amazing geometric patterns. Watch along as I show you how I do it, and see why I think these simple projects reinforce valuable skills. There are many ways to break down rough lumber. I used to use my miter saw for this, but after having the wood bind up a few times and having it kind of kick back a bit, I find it easier and safer to get boards to their rough length using the jigsaw. It's fast enough and it gets the job done. If you do decide to use your miter saw for this, go slow, take light passes, and be careful. I get a decent amount of snipe for my planer, so I aim for around 4 inches longer than my target finished cutting board length at this stage. It is a bit wasteful, but it's not too bad and it helps ensure that I get a good, consistent thickness. I also try to make sure I exclude any major voids, knots, or cracks. I don't like filling holes in cutting boards with epoxy or CA glue, given that they will be used for food preparation. I like to use the table on my table saw or sometimes the butcher block of my miter station to test the flatness of the pieces. The table saw table really is the only true flat surface I have in my shop. I find that the lengths of these boards, which are always around or under 2 feet, most boards are flat enough that a couple of very light passes on the planer will take out any high spots. This was the case here. If the boards are moderately unflat, I will put them on a piece of MDF or melamine and use shims and hot glue to create a simple jointing sled. I run them through the planer, taking small cuts, alternating sides. It's important to take a similar amount off each side to help reduce the risk that they will cup or bow. When you expose new wood through the milling process, you can change the moisture differential between the two faces. This can cause unfavorable wood movement as it dries out. Since the final sizes of the cutting boards will still fit through my planer, I typically aim for around 1/4 to 1/2 inch thicker than what my target thickness is. Now it's time to square up the edges. My approach here is to use a level as a straight edge and run that through the table saw. The trick to this process is to ensure that the convex side of the curve is tight to the straight edge and that the straight edge says tight to the fence. You want to move the straight edge and the piece of wood through the saw at the same time, not allowing them to move independently. This gives me a pretty good clean edge. I then flip the pieces over and rip the other rough edge. With 2 clean edges, I lay out my boards to determine my final layout. This usually means further ripping down the larger pieces and often picking through my offcuts to find thin, complementary pieces. I guess that is why I never throw out any wood, right? I spend a fair bit of time at this stage making sure I'm happy with the way the boards look. In fact, I wasn't happy with the way one of these boards looked after the glue up, so I cut it in half and glued in a contrasting strip of cherry. I think it pays off to take your time and make sure you like what you're putting together here. The final step to getting a perfect glue up from the table saw is to take a very minimal pass, like 1/2 or so of the blade thickness, to clean up the edges. You also want to make sure that you alternate the face that is up when you're making the cuts. This will ensure that if there's any variance from 90 degrees on your saw, you are creating complementary angles that glue perfectly tight. Now that I'm happy with the layout and have those nice tight joints, it's time to break out the clamps. I try to always put a strip of painter's tape on my clamps before I set the pieces on it. This ensures that the clamps won't stain or make any marks on the wood, and it makes cleanup a breeze. It's pretty annoying scraping off hardened glue on the parallel clamps. So this is a couple of seconds of work that pays dividends. I use Titebond 3 for cutting boards as it's both waterproof and food safe. I apply liberal amounts of glue to both faces and work pretty quickly to stay within Titebond 3's 10-minute open time. For simple glue ups like this, it's not super stressful, but it's a good idea to get it done as efficiently as possible. I used 4 clamps here, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top. I glued all 3 boards together. You just have to make sure you don't actually glue the cutting boards together. I don't use a domino or biscuits or anything for these. Alignment isn't critical as they have to go through the planer again. Having it as flat as possible does make that step easier though. I give it a quick check with my finger to make sure that the joints are pretty flush. If I wasn't able to get them aligned well enough, I would just put a clamp on each of the joints or use cauls. Fast forwarding to the next day, I remove the boards from the clamps and use my trusty Richard scraper tool to remove the squeeze out that has hardened on the surface. Fun tip, I used a file to put a bit of a sharp edge on the scraper and it pulls off the hardened glue much better. It's much easier to do this about 45 minutes after you clamp them up, but I often just wait till the next day. It only does take a few minutes. I feed the boards through the planer, trying to take off only the glue from the one side. This means taking very, very light passes until the blades are just kissing the wood. Once I get the glue removed on the first face of the board, I run them through on the other side and get them to the thickness I want. For these boards, that's around 1.5 inches thick. I use my crosscut sled on my table saw to get the boards to their final width. Nothing super scientific here. I aim for a good ratio of length to width and often use features in the grain pattern to dictate where these cuts will be. These boards are gifts for friends, so I aim for the best looking, most functional board over targeting some arbitrary size. I don't have to rip these down as I'm happy with the dimensions after the crosscuts, and the long edges are all clean from the jointing work I did before the glue up. I like to put a bit of a detail on the top and bottom edges. I use a 1/8 inch roundover bit to soften the top edge and a 1/2 inch chamfer bit to make a nice profile on the bottom. I like the chamfer on the bottom as it gives the boards a bit of a floating look and gives your hands somewhere to easily pick up the board. I don't typically make handles or Jew screws on my board for 2 reasons. One, I don't really like the way they look. I find that they take away from the clean look of the boards. And 2, I find them a pain in the butt when you're actually chopping veggies on them and you need to scrape them into the frying pan. Things like diced onions or garlic just seem to get trapped in the groove and it's annoying. Let me know below in the comments if I'm wrong and if you find Jew screws essential. I like to sand my cutting boards using 80, 120, and then 180 grit with the random orbital sander. Then I hand sand the chamfered and rounded over edges. I give the boards a wipe down with orange mineral spirits and let them dry and then vacuum them off. I don't always water pop my boards, but decided to on these ones. The theory here is that it causes the wood fibers to rise up so that you can sand them back down. Honestly, I don't really notice the difference on the ones I do and the ones I don't. After they're coated in mineral oil and beeswax, the water doesn't appear to affect them much. After a good spritzing and some time to dry, I hit them with 320 grit sandpaper to knock down those fibers. Then it's another quick cleaning to remove all of the remaining dust. I use this Clapham's mineral oil and beeswax product that I get from Lee Valley for all of my cutting boards. It's made in Canada, food safe, all natural, and generally smells pretty good. I don't soak my boards in mineral oil as some people do. The Wood Whisperer has a pretty interesting video on what happens to wood that is soaked in oil finishes. That's not 100% applicable to these boards in mineral oil, but I find it totally unnecessary to soak them for days. I do 3 coats of the Clapham's finish, buffing off all of the residual wax after the last coat. This gives the boards a good finish that lasts a fair while and is very easy to top up as you use the board. Well, there you have it. The skills we gain or hone in building these simple projects goes a long way towards making us better at our craft. I hope you enjoyed this video.